in Indian country. So theoretically, if Congress wanted to, it could enact a statute tomorrow saying that whoever the federal government wanted to would have approval in Indian country.
A second question, are any tribes developing their own economic activities on reservation grounds so that this outside influence is less impactful?
Yes, we do have some tribes, and that, so for example, the Crow Nation in Montana has been very actively involved. Navajo Nation has a lot of development as well, and so they've had some control. But they can't control, there's still some development that's happening right at the fringes of their border, so they can't control right outside of their border.
I got here right when you were talking about the metaphor or the language of rape to describe what we do. And I was a women's studies major, which I say eco-feminist, but I read Dr. Carol Merchant's book. Have you read Death of Nature? And she really goes into that whole thing about the ancient practice of when they would mine, they would actually pray, and it was very sacred. So, I mean, I think it's very interesting that you bring that up, and it seems to me like when we talk about climate change and the way Native Americans related to the planet, the earth, mother, it's a powerful metaphor to have people cause to think about their behavior. And I just wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, no, and it is really difficult. It also puts tribes, what we see in these contests, we see tribes put into really difficult positions because the federal government will say, because how it usually comes up is some industry needs the federal government approval to do something, right? It needs a permit. That's what was issued in Dakota Access. So they need a permit to do something. And so the federal government will reach out to the tribe and say, what do you think about this? And oh yeah, you tell us where your sacred spaces are and then we'll protect them. Well, the problem is, as soon as you tell the federal government where your sacred space is, that's available through the Freedom of Information Act. And anybody can FOIA it and get that information. And so it's no longer sacred. And so you find tribes trying to make this decision, well, should we share that information and make it more publicly accessible, or should we keep it secret? And the Dakota Access is actually a cautionary tale to tribes, because what the tribes there did is they said where the sacred sites were, and then the company, so they issued that in a brief calling for an emergency injunction on a Friday. The company came in, bulldozed everything on Saturday, bulldozed all the sacred sites. It was the Saturday before Labor Day. The judge was so incensed because then the company said, well, there's nothing left to protect, so you don't have a claim. The judge was incensed, brought everybody in on Monday, but there was nothing the judge could do because they had destroyed the sacred sites.
Well, I just think that's a conversation we need to have about the epistemology or cosmology of the way we Westerners perceive the Earth as separate from us. And I think it's a powerful, cogent argument that needs to be developed. You don't hear about it a lot in the, I mean, when I read, it was all the witch burnings and everything, all the indigenous knowledge they tried to destroy.
Yeah. I would encourage you to read, if you haven't read it already, Red Earth, White Lies by Victoria. It talks about exactly about that. And that's actually an argument. So my specialty is climate change.
Okay.
And I've argued in other contexts that indigenous epistemologies are really the epistemologies that we need to move towards to help us solve the climate change problem.
In general, how active are non-Indian law enforcement people outside the boundaries of the reservation? How active are they in going onto the reservation and assisting in arrest and prosecution of non-Indians who commit crimes?
It depends on whether or not they have a memorandum of understanding. If they don't have a memorandum of understanding with the tribe, then they don't have any jurisdiction, they can't go there.
So that would require a memorandum of understanding between a community outside
Right.
who's willing to police on the reservation.
Yeah. Has anybody seen Longmire? Yeah, then you know, like, Walt is never supposed to be on the reservation, right? Because he doesn't have, so it's a good example that there's crime happening on the reservation or off the reservation, and the local sheriff wants to go on the reservation, but he's not there, so he usually violates the law and like sneaks on at night, which I watched that show and I'm like, that's illegal. But without the memorandum of understanding, they don't have jurisdiction. Yeah.
You're highly articulate, you're passionate, and you must have paid a dear, dear price to get to this point, and you're competent. What is your background? I think I heard you say you may be a part of the tribe somewhere.
Yeah, so well, first, thank you. Appreciate that. Because right now I feel like a germ-infested mess. So
A what?
Say that again.
a germ-infested mess because I got a cold. So I appreciate that. I'm a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians, which is right on the border with Canada and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So that's where I grew up. My mom was a tribal judge, so I grew up with this. This is always part of my life.
Did she have a legal background?
She did. She went to law school.
Are you a lawyer?
Yes.
And you represent
Or I play
who?
one by
Just
day.
the tribe? Or?
I'm a law professor, so I am technically a lawyer. I don't actively practice anymore. I do serve as a judge for 2 tribes. So I'm the district judge for Prairie Band here in Kansas, and then I'm an appellate judge for my tribe in Michigan. But I don't actually represent clients anymore. Other than our students, we have a clinic where we work with tribes, and I supervise our students who represent clients, but I don't actively practice anymore.
In a fundamental sense, we have a provision in the Constitution about the equal protection of the law. Could you not argue in some of these situations you've described that you have a category of people who are not receiving equal protection of the law?
You could, but it wouldn't be a successful argument because the U.S. Constitution does not apply in Indian country.
Well,
I
that
thought,
can be-
well, this is getting to a point. I thought Indians were also citizens of the United States.
We are, but it doesn't apply to tribes.
Well, but does it not apply to
Well, they can
individual
vote, right?
persons?
It applies to me when I'm off the reservation. When I'm on the reservation, the U.S. Constitution doesn't apply. That's a case from, I think it was 1905, Tolton v. Mays, where the question was whether or not somebody who was prosecuted and tried in tribal court was entitled to a jury, which is a Fifth Amendment right. And the U.S. Constitution says tribes are separate sovereigns, and so the U.S. Constitution doesn't apply.
Because I recently was with another group and someone was explaining that of the Southern Cheyenne, about a third reside on the reservation, about a third elsewhere in Oklahoma, and about a third in California. So that would mean 2/3 of them would be in the situation of a United States citizen, and just the 1/3 would be on the reservation, correct?
It would mean that the U.S. Constitution doesn't apply to those on the reservation.
On the reservation, okay.
We still have same rights of citizenship. We can still get passports and vote,
Yeah.
but the Constitution doesn't apply.
Do tribes have constitutions?
Many do, yes.
Can we apply for political asylum? Can you grant us?
Unfortunately, no.
Ah, dang it. There goes that plan.
When we invited you, we couldn't have known that while you were talking, there'd be a huge battle going on over the rights of the Indians to vote because of them having or not having a street address.
Oh,
Yeah.
Do you have any insight on that?
I do. Sorry.
Pizza's more important than something.
I was hungry, sorry. So, this is going on in North Dakota. The North Dakota voter ID law says, in order to vote, you have to have a street address. The U.S. Post Office refuses to give street addresses to people living on the reservation. You can only have a post office box. So it is technically, under the U.S. Post Office policy, impossible to have a street address. So what lawyers have been mobilizing, every once in a while we do good things. Everybody's been going up to North Dakota, and what we've been doing is you have to have an ID that has a street address on it. What we've been doing is the tribes have been reissuing tribal IDs, which is ID that you can use to vote, with the tribe's street address on it.
Yes.
So they've been reissuing everybody in the tribe, because the law doesn't say you can't have the same address.
right.
It's a problem with the law. So there's just been lots of people getting their name with the tribe's street address on it, and new tribal IDs issued. So there's been mass mobilization to address that problem.
So since the point of their law is to suppress voting, not to sort out where people live, are they still going to find ways to get around those tribal IDs, or, I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure there will be. So the National Congress, this is another place where you can help, is go be a poll watcher in North Dakota or South Dakota. South Dakota is another big problem area too. We were actually going to send students, but we couldn't get the funding. You can go be a poll watcher. And tribal ID is a proper form of voter identification under federal law. I'm sure there's going to be skirmishes over that. I'm sure that's going to happen at the polling places. So the other thing is the National Congress of American Indians has a Get Out the Vote project where they're organizing, students to come up and lawyers as they're able to come up and be poll watchers the day of. This is all in backlash to the senator from North Dakota voted against Kavanaugh.
The woman.
Yeah, Heidi starts with a K. She voted against Kavanaugh, and so there's been a big movement to try to unseat her.
Heidi Camp.
Yes.
Jesus.
You've given us more of your money's worth.
What would be the one thing, like, I personally think in this country we need to have a serious conversation about the genocide of an entire civilization. I mean, to me it just seems like we don't even have a conversation about what could we do to make this, to at least have some parity in the way we treat Native American nations in this country. What could we do?
Well, I think that goes back to, well, first of all, be involved, right? So we brainstormed a lot of ways that you can be involved and help. And then it goes back to the proposal to just empower tribes. Let us do it.
Yeah.
We can do it well.
Yeah.
We know just in general that localities tend to do better, right? Lawrence is going to be better at dealing with
Yes.
Lawrence problems than Washington, D.C. is going to be. So this isn't rocket science. Let's just re-empower. Vote for people who understand tribes. Those are things that you can do. Vote for Sharice Davids if you can, right? Just have a tribal woman in Congress. That would be kind of exciting.
So if a non-native can't be prosecuted by a tribal nation, is the reverse true?
Can a tribal member be prosecuted by a non-native? Yeah, if I commit a crime here, Kansas can prosecute
Well,
me.
see, that doesn't seem fair.
Charles Branson can come and prosecute me. Absolutely, yeah.
Are the energy companies doing anything to police their own man camps since these are their employees?
They're starting to, and this is actually kind of the next article I want to write, is the economics of all of this. Because even though Standing Rock was ultimately unsuccessful in blocking the pipeline, they cost Dakota Access huge amounts of money in terms of PR, in terms of security, in terms of delay in getting that finalized. So I want to write a piece on the economics of this, like since oftentimes legally we ultimately can't stop this development happening for all the reasons that we've discussed here today, how can tribes be mobilized in such a way that we make companies hurt so much that they don't do it? And we've also started to see, to answer your question, the other side of that is companies have started to realize, learning from incidents like the Standing Rock, that to just go ahead and do this infrastructure without consultation with tribes is not only a PR mess, but is a financial mess, because it can be very costly for them. So they are starting to be somewhat responsive and try to deal with this themselves.
I'm talking about the sexual violence. Are they
Right.
trying to police the sexual
Right,
violence?
exactly. Yeah, they've tried to handle some, but the reality is they don't have enforcement authority, right? So the most that they can do is they can just fire somebody, which doesn't necessarily fix the problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
It's not a question, but I used to spend my summers for years and years up in Upper Michigan, Cedarville, just outside of Cedarville, at the hotel that was called Island.
Nice.
And since my parents were old enough to be my grandparents, and I didn't have any kids around and I could play with it, so I would walk into town. And then there was this little Indian chief, lived in a little tiny house on the west end of town. And he saw me wandering around one day and beckoned me over and asked me what I was doing, and I said I was trying to pass some time, you know. And so he invited me in, and he told me all kinds of stories and everything, so I took me under his wing, told me how to forecast the weather by looking at what was going on, you know, as opposed to, and I mean, it was neat, the things I learned from that old man.
Oh, I'll have, yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Indigenous knowledge.
Thank you. You did a lot.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure, my pleasure.
So what project does Cerise belong to?
No.
If you're not,
You're very kind.
no, I mean.
Well, you gotta go trick or
Thank
treat
you.
tonight?
No, I'm gonna go to Christmas concert, I'm gonna go to Eden Prayer.